guarantees. I'm joined now by my good friend Ricky Mathews, host of the Ricky Mathews Show on SuperTalk Mississippi. Ricky, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Ashley, how you doing, my friend?
Man, I am doing as well as I can be, sitting in this driver's seat for the first time, guest hosting a show. I know a few years ago you got your first taste of this. This is a new experience, isn't it?
Well, it is, man. And it's, to go sit in that chair after being a publisher, in your case, being a community leader and working for Haley Barbour and Phil Bryan along the way, to sit, at a seat with a live microphone. It's a little bit intimidating, but I think once you realize that you're not trying to, you're going to be who you are. And once you decide you're going to be who you are, it goes pretty smoothly. And listen, I've listened to every word this morning. And you're a natural. You've done a terrific job this morning.
Well, thank you so much for that, Ricky. That means a lot coming from you. You're a person that I have an incredible amount of respect for. And, I'm so glad you got to be on with me today. There is probably nobody in Mississippi who has had a front row seat to more gubernatorial campaigns, politics, big policy issues. Of course, your career as publisher of the Sun-Herald, your newspaper career even after that, you saw this happen in other states, and you've seen this on the front lines. We've talked a lot about the debate today, but let's talk a little bit more generally about politics in Mississippi. And, you certainly came up at a time when Republicans didn't have a shot to win a statewide race. And then we all remember in the 1990s, a guy like Governor Fordyce, who came in and was the only statewide elected official that was Republican for a while. You were there on the front lines of sort of the Republican revolution in Mississippi that was launched by Haley Barbour and all the changes that happened so fast. Where do you think we are today, and how do you think this governor's race kind of fits into that broader theme?
Well, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. I mean, because there's this national political thing. You and I have talked about it so many times before. The world is so polarized today, and the way that social media works and the way that news outlets are situated today, news outlets from a national perspective and from a state perspective. I'll come back to that in just a second. But there's such a polarizing thing today. However, when I talk to people, Ashley, and I think you have the same experience, there are a lot of people in the middle. They're moderates. They're leaning, they're in the middle, leaning right, or they're in the middle, leaning left, and they want us to solve problems. They want us to focus on solving problems. And it's interesting, if you look at the state of Mississippi, it's done a fairly good job with economic development. You see teacher pay raises. You look at what they now call the Mississippi Miracle, as reading scores continue to go better. We, in spite of all the politics, we've been able to actually focus on solving problems. The point I wanted to make about media in general, I think media has too often worked too hard to tip the scale, and without really naming the organizations. I see nonprofit news organizations breaking stories in Mississippi, just a week out from the election. And if you go look at who's funding these organizations, oftentimes in most cases, you're going to find that the funders are incredibly politically motivated, and they want to exact change in the state. And I know you came from news media yourself. You're a former reporter. I spent a career in news media. I covet the days when news is about providing facts and letting people make their own decision, and not so much, of course, on the editorial pages. We identified it as an editorial, but bias has snuck into everything that's happening in media today, and I don't think that that's a good place to be honest with you. It makes it harder for people making decisions, and too often the powerful funders are working really hard to tip the scale. So it's a mess, is the way I would say it, and it's hard to kind of sort through all of the facts and the distortions of campaigns to get to where you want to be. But I think people are working to try to sort that out in spite of all this.
And it's difficult, Ricky. I think you're absolutely right. It's something that you and I have talked about a lot before, and that is, gone are the days when reporters certainly reporters are human beings. They have political positions. They have preferences. But there were certainly times when they would give a straight-up story, fair and balanced coverage. Today, what we see is a lot of the media entities, they don't even pretend anymore. They have become political PR mouthpieces for candidates or movements. And it's not confined to one side. It happens on both sides. You and I see it and talk about it. And so the difficulty is, where does it leave the voter? How do you wade through all of this nonsense and information that's out there to really get down to what are the things I need to know about these candidates? What do you do, Rick?
Hey, you know what? You know what's so ironic, Ashley, is that SuperTalk Mississippi Media creates SuperTalk Mississippi News. SuperTalk has conservative shows, but lots of shows don't play it either way from a political point of view. The irony to me is they're known as sort of a conservatives collection of radio stations, but they have built this very, very traditional news effort, this unbiased. You had Caleb on just a few minutes ago.
Right.
I'm proud of SuperTalk and what they've been able to accomplish. I think more people should download their app and maybe hot link to supertalk.fm website so they can have access to the incredible news effort that's underway at SuperTalk Mississippi. I think that's kind of ironic because these others sort of play themselves out as being non-biased and objective, and oftentimes they're just the opposite of that. But it's an interesting place, and of course the debate was very interesting. I thought the way you and Rhino talked about it was pretty spot on. If you support Presley, you probably think he won. If you support Reeves, you probably think he won. I don't think that anything definitive came out of last night. So it's I say you can't strike up a win for either side the way I look at it.
We've talked a lot about the debate today and kind of analyzed it from every angle. What's going to be interesting to me is what is turnout going to look like next Tuesday? What groups are going to turn out? What's going to motivate people to turn out? And turnout historically in Mississippi has not been great. And so the difficulty is it's not just getting a person in Mississippi, a citizen, to agree with you. It's getting them to go and cast that ballot on your behalf. And did you think you heard anything last night that would lead someone who may not be motivated to vote to actually get up and go do it?
Well, here's what my thought about it. It may not necessarily be something that was discussed last night, but the fact that we had a debate is a really good thing because it brings focus to the process. It brings focus to the election cycle, and maybe people will get involved. But let me tell you this: if you're a Democrat, if you're in the middle and you lean Democrat, or you're in the middle and you lean Republican, you better focus that the chief executive of our state doesn't have power as it relates to the Constitution of our state. That's in the legislature, but he does have appointment power. So when it comes to judges, adjunct general, if the Senate were to come open, you may not know exactly how you're going to vote, but if you tend to lean Democrat or you tend to lean Republican, you better realize that our governor has appointment power, and that is a really, really big deal. That's a reason that if you're not super motivated either way, if you're not highly motivated to vote for either guy, you probably ought to go ahead and vote anyway. I really urge everyone to vote. Participate in democracy, and realize that the governor of the state of Mississippi can really make a big difference. And if you're leaning Democrat or you're leaning Republican, you better vote appropriately.
It occurs to me that you're not just voting for a governor next Tuesday. You're voting for a government because there are so many agencies, executive agencies that fall under the governor's purview, state agency directors, boards and commission, college board appointments. The governor has power to build a large infrastructure in government in Mississippi that's going to dictate how a lot of things go over the next 4 years. And so, but we never hear about those things, really. I mean, it's always so focused on 3 or 4 very succinct issues that there are disagreements on. But you make a very valid point there, Ricky, which is stakes are incredibly high in these races. They're incredibly high in these elections, just as they always have been. Ricky, I hear the music coming up here. Would you mind sticking around with me for another segment? And we'll dig deeper into some other things. We'll get off of debate and governor's race for a minute. We'll talk about some of the things that are happening nationally and in the world. Got another few minutes to stick with me? Thank you so much, Ricky. This is Ashley Edwards. I'm joined by Ricky Mathews. We're live in the Element Well studios. We're going to go to break now, and we'll see you right on the backside of the studio. Joining me is Ricky Mathews, superstar and host of the Ricky Mathews Show on SuperTalk Mississippi. Ricky, let's switch gears a little bit from our last segment and start talking about some national politics and some international politics. Something that I know that has been close to your heart, and you and I have talked about before on your show, is what's going on in Ukraine, and of course now what's going on in Israel. And there's a lot of things going on in Washington right now to determine funding. You're seeing this continued sort of infighting and the factions among the Republican Party, disagreement between the House and the Senate on how they're going to approach the funding bills for Ukraine and Israel. It seems to me that some of these issues are more black and white than we give them credit for. Politics likes to get caught in all this gray minutia. But you've got two situations here where sovereign, independent people were attacked. And it makes sense that if the United States is going to continue to hold its moral authority in the world, it has to stand up and say, we support Ukraine and Israel. But it's getting caught up in sort of the spokes of politics in Washington right now. What are your thoughts on where we stand today with that?
Well, I think we have a new speaker, and I think he's saying the right things. Obviously, he's got to work through the politicization of Ukraine. I was surprised, as you were, that the situation in Ukraine became so politicized so fast. And that's a little bit unfortunate. I think he's saying the right thing. I think, there are concerns about corruption in Ukraine. So if they were to provide funding and put some kind of accountability measures in place, I think who's going to argue with that? I think that's a move in the right direction. So I think that may be the way that he's going to thread that needle. As it relates to Israel, I don't think there's anybody who is watching this closely and understands our alliance with Israel that would say that we don't need to fund them. What has amazed me, though, frankly, is that there has been this rise of anti-Semitism. That's the thing that has surprised me the most. And what it shows, Ashley, coming back to all the conversations you and I have had about social media, it's too easy to mislead people. It's too easy to spread misinformation. And people, as a general rule, too many people as a general rule, especially young people, don't take the time to do their own homework. They get caught up in whatever the narrative is that's being fed to them. And frankly, the way it works is the more you interact with that narrative, the more of that kind of information you get. That's the way these algorithms work. And it has a tendency to help people be convinced of one thing when, in fact, something entirely different is actually happening. It's scary. It really is. You know what? It's hard for me to get our head around. I know where you live. We live near each other on Back Bay and Biloxi. The wall between Israel and Gaza is about where the beach is and on the coast. Okay, so if you think about where we live, is about where the music festival was happening. So that's how far they had to come to get to the music festival. But many of those small towns along that strip there are very near the wall. Can you imagine going to bed at night and worrying about what's going to come over? Hey, I have to tell you that I've talked about my farmer friends up in the Mississippi Delta on my SuperTalk Outdoors show, but who I lease a considerable amount of land from, they own land in Yuma, Arizona as well. Can you imagine living in Yuma, Arizona, or any other border town and wondering what's come over the border and might they come to my house? I mean, these are the kind of thoughts that are going through people's heads today, man. We live in a very unsettling place right now. We better come to grips with a lot of this. We need to fund Ukraine. We need to help funding in Israel, and we need to address our border. That's a big issue.
I completely agree with you on that, Ricky. And I think a lot of Mississippians understand this sentiment because at the end of the day, when your daughter or your son is sleeping across the hall from you and you can't go to bed and close your eyes knowing that they're going to be safe, that someone's not going to come in the middle of the night, terrorists are not going to come in the middle of the night, kidnap them, murder them, use them as pawns in trying to make a political point, essentially, which is what Hamas was really doing. I think any of us, any reasonable person would respond as strongly as their resources would allow them to do. And so, it's difficult for me, Ricky. I watch what's going on in the college campuses in the United States. Tulane, one of my alma maters, Harvard, one of my other alma maters. I've never been one to use the word woke. It's not. I don't like the culture wars. It's not part of my DNA. But I will tell you, since this issue with Israel began and watching the response, when people can't tell the difference between a terrorist who is committing atrocious terrorism and a freedom fighter, and when those lines are blurred, it seems like we've really lost something in this country of understanding the difference between good and bad, good and evil, right and wrong. What are your thoughts on that?
Actually, think about it. The terrorists who came in through paragliding and however else they came there, motorcycles and whatever, into each of these little enclaves, they wore GoPro devices. I mean, you can see, I'm not encouraging anyone to see, but the collection of GoPro images that are coming off of that, I mean, and then you see the number of dead and children and, entire communities wiped away, and what happened at the music festival. The fact that even with the GoPro evidence that the terrorists themselves wore, people still denied that actually happened. That is the world we're in today. That is amazing to me that we're able to twist people's minds so much that we can create alternate views of reality, or in this case, a view of reality that it never actually happened. That's amazing to me, man. That we live in a place like that makes it so difficult for us to cause people to want to do the right thing. To be able to differentiate between right and wrong. And if there has ever been a clear issue of that, is in this moment as it relates to Hamas and Israel. We are in that moment.
I think you're right. I do think this is a clarifying moment. And I think it's important, especially with what's been happening in America. This is the most divided America that has existed in decades. And you know that. I know that. We talk about that a lot. But what I see happening now, especially as a result of the response to what's going on in Israel, is that we're no longer separating strictly among party lines. There are Democrats and Republicans who can easily agree this is crazy. Some of the things that are being said are crazy. And it's starting to create a new contrast, not in terms of, what team do I belong to, what political team do I belong to, but can I see the difference between good and evil? And It reminds us of some things that we've lost. It reminds us all, whether we're Democrats or Republicans, ultimately that people deserve the ability to be safe in their own homes. They deserve freedom from terrorism. They should not have to be subjected to the kind of things that we've seen in Ukraine and Israel. And I wonder if that will be a bit of a unifying situation in Washington, because we do see now there is bipartisanship on some of these funding questions. Do you feel like that this is one of those sort of catalyst or defining moments in which people really have to pick a side about where do we fundamentally stand?
Yeah, you know what's going to happen? It's going to have to hit home. And unfortunately, I'm afraid, Ashley, I hate to say this, but some terrorist act is going to occur in the United States. And it's going to be related directly back to the open borders. I'm afraid that actually may happen. And when that happens, there's going to be an awakening in America, just like after 9/11, and we're going to have to come together. And it's unfortunate that we're in that moment, but that, it seems inevitable to me. I hope that's not the case. I pray that's not the case, but it seems inevitable.
9/11 is now 22 years behind us, and so many folks have forgotten. I mean, my children weren't even alive when that happened. I see adults now that will say, well, I was in elementary school and didn't really understand it. And so much of that has gone out of our mind. And I'm afraid you're right, Ricky. I mean, it is I don't blame Republicans in Washington that say, we don't necessarily have opposition to funding Ukraine, but we also want to see an effort to make sure our own borders are secure. And I think that stands hand in hand. If you're going to secure other people in other countries, we need to make sure that we're also secure here in America. But on the same note, it's not an either-or situation. It can be an and situation. We can fund Israel. We can fund Ukraine. We can secure our border.
You know,
agree with that?
Actually, the polarizing ends in our country too often define the conversation. That certainly happens in Washington. It's interesting that while all these polarizing issues have taken place, there is the contingent within Congress, both Democrats and Republicans, that have actually been able to come together on lots of things. You know, I hope we can continue to do that. Sometimes there needs to be a clarion call. That sometimes there has to be a very compelling case for action. And I think what's swirling around Israel and the Jewish community, or really around the world, it may create for us that possibility. We shall see.
Ricky, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for joining me today. This has been Ricky Mathews, host of the Ricky Mathews Show on SuperTalk. Stick with us through this break. We're live in the Element Wealth Studios, and we'll be back very shortly.